Uh, I was uh, I was appointed to the bench in 1996 by then Governor Engler, and I had been the two-term county Republican chairman before I went on the bench. And uh, Bill Schmay said that Kalamazoo is a conservative county. Well, Kalamazoo County is first of all, as I recall, it was one of the two counties in Michigan in 1972 that voted for George McGovern. So it may be conservative, but it isn't nearly as conservative as Eaton County. When I went on the bench, I was a district court judge, and we had a lot of highways, a lot of two-lane roads in our county. Drunk driving was a major issue in Eaton County. And when I went on the bench, I had a plan for how I was going to deal with repeat drunk drivers. And my plan was for second offenders, they were going to do 30 days in jail, and then it would go up 30 days for each successive conviction. And sure enough, I was on the bench for about 2 weeks, and a guy came in on a second offense, and I gave him his 30 days. His name was Bob. And so things went on, and he apparently did his 30 days, and about 2 weeks after he got out, he was back on his next offense. And of course, I remember I was a rookie judge, and he showed up in front of me in the courtroom, and I said, I was shocked. I said, Bob, I mean, what were you thinking? And of course, I'm thinking that he would be sitting there in his jail cell thinking about how he was going to, learn the lessons that I'd taught him, that he was going to, stop drinking, that he was going to be a better husband, a better employee, a better parent. But anyway, so when I asked Bob what was he thinking, he said, literally on the record, he said, well, Judge Hoffman, I was sitting in my jail cell thinking just how drunk I was going to get when I got the hell out of this jail cell. And so I was a little shocked. I was kind of taken aback. And so it was one of those aha moments, I guess you would say, when I started thinking that maybe my route for dealing with crimes of addiction and alcoholism was not a very good route. And shortly after that, I can't remember where I found it, but I got an article in my hands about drug courts. I don't know if it was one of Bill's articles, but I was reading this article about drug courts, and I was a graduate of Western Michigan University in political science, but I also took some psychology classes, and they were very much behavioral modification oriented down there, and everyone had a little white rat, and you trained them in terms of using rewards and sanctions, positive and negative reinforcement, to get them to change their behavior. So I was kind of oriented towards this stuff, and I'm reading this article and said, geez, this makes perfect sense. And we somehow got information about we could get some grant money for a probation officer if we did a drug court. Well, we wrote in to, of course, it was BJA. We wrote in and said, well, could we do this with drunk driving cases? And they said, huh, what? And they said, well, why not? Okay, come out to California. So Jeff Sauter, who was our prosecutor, and I, and a defense attorney and a couple of treatment people, put ourselves together as a team. We were calling ourselves Drunk Driving Court at the time, as I recall. And so we went out to California and went through 3-day training. And apparently Mike Cavanaugh, who's now a good friend of mine, who was doing something similar a few months before. He was started off in New Mexico, in Albuquerque. Unfortunately, we didn't know about it. But so we came home and set up a sobriety court. At that point, we were calling it a DWI court. And we also got word then that there was a national conference, and there was some money to go to Washington. So we went to a national conference, and that's where I met Bill Schmay. And so Bill put together a breakfast for the Michigan people, and there was us, and I think that there was maybe one other program. So there were like 3 of us that met, had breakfast I had suggested that it was the president's breakfast and that Bill should pick up the check, but he demurred. But he said he wasn't the president, and so anyway, so we started talking on the phone. Bill and I were just talking back and forth. We probably were talking 2 or 3 times a week, and Tammy Woodhams was his right-hand person down in Kalamazoo, and we started meeting. We had a couple of meetings in my courthouse in the county commissioner's room, and we always said that at that point the association was Bill, Tammy, and me, and that with the association could meet around a card table, and we then started meeting in an Italian restaurant in Hastings, which was kind of halfway between Kalamazoo and Grand Ledge, a little place called Johnny Canoon's, which actually wasn't bad, but it's no longer there. But so we were having these meetings, and Bill is right. There was at one of these meetings, Bill said, "Well, I need to step down as president, and really you should be president." And as he said, there's not much work involved, and being the charming little leprechaun that he is, he talked me into becoming the next president. And there was a national congress. The NADCP was starting to hold congresses of state associations. And even though we hadn't formalized our association, they sent us to this meeting. I think it was in New Orleans. And we were supposed to send 2 people. So Tammy Woodhams and I went down, and they were talking about having conferences. And so Tammy and I were sitting at the airport in New Orleans and said, "Let's throw a conference." And it was kind of like an our gang comedy kind of thing, like we can do the show right here. And so we could do the conference in Kalamazoo. And so we put on this first conference, and this was just as the association was getting organized. We literally did not have a checkbook, so we put on the conference, and of course the great story, which has a fair amount of truth to it, it was that we were checking we didn't know if anybody was going to show up. That's just how unorganized we were. We didn't know if anybody was coming, and we were checking to see what our credit lines were on our Visa cards in case we were, the Kalamazoo Hilton, was looking to get paid, and we didn't have any way to pay them. Mercifully, 150 people showed up, and I think we made something less than $100, and that's how we established our first checking account. And the conference was a real great success. We had some good breakout sessions, and the association sort of grew from there, because at that first conference we had people like Brian McKenzie came, who became a president. Mike Haley came, who was a president, and Phyllis McMillan came and who became the godmother of our training programs and ran our conferences for many, many years. Just a lot of really great people, and we didn't realize it at the time, but we suddenly had this small core of really interesting, dedicated, creative people that became kind of the initial core of the association. And then Bill and I, we talked on the phone every day, it seemed like, and sometimes more than once a day, because those first years, it literally was a question of survival. Bill talks about the meeting he had with the Supreme Court justice that did not like us. There were a lot of people that didn't like us on the Supreme Court and the legislature. Scale was not really on board. It was survival in the early years, and it was sort of like Bill and I just became a team. And Bill was sort of the great philosopher king, and I was sort of the political warlord. And I guess that's the way it sort of came together. Bill thought deep thoughts, and I figured out how to do stuff. And so we did, and for a long time, for like probably 3 or 4 years with State Court Administrator's Office, they would have judicial conferences, and we would somehow beg them to give us a breakout session. And they were never too excited about it. And it was always the Bill and Harvey show. I mean, we would show up, and it would be the 2 of us, and there would be like 3 people there. But if we would get one new drug court out of it, we thought it was a success. And so that's really the way it was. It was just each year we kept getting a few more, and it kept growing slowly. Bill is right. We went through a long session or a long period where for the association, we didn't really want legislation because, first of all, we knew that there was a lot of opposition to what we were doing. And we were concerned. Whenever you go into the legislature, you never. It's sort of like life is a box of chocolates. You never know what it's going to get. The legislature, you never know what you're going to get. You may put in a bill, but there's a pretty good chance that it's not going to look the same when it comes out as it did when it went in. So we were always very concerned, considering the political headwinds we were facing, as to what sort of legislation we would get if we wrote legislation. So we really liked operating during those early years under the radar. And it was, in some ways, it was very good because it gave us a chance to grow. It gave us a chance to experiment, to try things. And so those early years, we didn't have legislation. One of the things that we learned was that the main thing was to get out of the way of these programs and let them grow, let people see them. If they would see these programs, they would like them. The chairman of at some point in time, and I think the push came from the Supreme Court, we were going to have legislation. And I happen to know, I've been around politics for a long time, but I happen to know the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, a gentleman by the name of Alan Cropsey, was chairman of House Judiciary, and part of his district included Mount Pleasant. And we had a treatment court up there, one of the early ones. And so I somehow talked him into going on his birthday, to a session at the Mount Pleasant Treatment Court, and he wound up spending the entire day. He was going to spend 15 minutes, and he spent the day. And Al is a very conservative gentleman, but he's a very fine gentleman as well. And he came out saying, as a supporter. And so Al was the primary sponsor for our first legislation, and we probably spent a year in sessions with him and other people writing the legislation. It wasn't the greatest legislation that was ever been written, but it wasn't too bad, and we've had to make changes to it over the years. But that's where we kind of earned our chops politically in the legislature, was getting that through. And we've had a lot of legislative success in terms of a variety of bills. We now have over 180 treatment courts in the state, and but Bill is far too generous in terms of the praise he gives to me. It really has been a team effort. I mean, there have been probably a dozen key people in the state that have done this. Bill is always the fountainhead. I mean, he just is. But there's a number of really intelligent, creative people, Bo and Mackenzie, Phyllis, that goes on and on. A lot of great people have worked in the association, and a lot of people deserve a lot of credit.
So the association started, you said you had on the card table.
Yeah.
A little different now.
Oh, yeah.
Hundreds of card tables.
Sure.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's great. I mean, the association is it really is a great organization. It's an organization which has developed contacts and strategic partners far in excess, I think, of what we were ever thinking about when we started this thing. One of the great things that has been done, and Sue Dobrich is probably one of my all-time favorite presidents. She's just very, very creative, very intelligent, and we would always have our annual retreat where we would go up to Petoskey and we do our strategic planning for the year. And Sue came up with the idea that, well, why don't we spend a half a day after we do all of our strategic planning to bring in the strategic partners? And so it's grown every year. So we always have 2 or 3 people from the governor's office. We have legislators. We have people from the medical society, from the prosecutors, from the defense attorneys, the sheriff's association, prosecutors, the chiefs of police, treatment organizations. I mean, and they all come, and we always take a subject that we talk about, and we spend a day talking in fairly deep thoughts about the particular thing that is somehow impacting the court system, treatment issues, and it's really been it's become sort of recognized that everybody puts it down on their calendar for the next year. So, I mean, that's one of the great things about it, is that we've moved beyond just us. We now have a network of various organizations that we can work with, so that when an issue comes up, we can go and we have people we can talk to. We can share ideas. We set up work groups. So I think that's been one of the things I think has been the most interesting, is watching it grow in terms of being something much more than just an organization of treatment courts. We've really grown into an entity that has an impact on the judicial system and the legal system and the political system beyond whatever we had what we originally thought about when Bill and I were just talking back and forth on the phone.
And you mentioned the sobriety court in Eaton County, the conservative area there, and so you have Jeff Sauter, who's one of the supporters of treatment courts at the time, and you had to do other bridge building as well.
Sure.
So this took a time, took a process, or again, was it a snap of the fingers and you're there?
Well, it certainly wasn't a snap of the fingers. Certainly when we started the DWI court, sobriety court in Eaton County, it was the sort of thing that, the other judges all thought we were crazy. I mean, they just said, you guys are just crazy. But it was the sort of thing that we just said, well, we don't care, we're going to do it. Eventually, they all came around. As a matter of fact, I think every judge in the county, in Eaton County now, does some kind of problem-solving court. There's a vet court, adult treatment court, and so on. So at some point we just had to do it. The thing that was, I think, most interesting in terms of when the DWI court was set up originally, we had people with multiple prior offenses coming in to the district court, but then the legislation was changed that all thirds and above became felons, which of course we didn't have jurisdiction over. So we just decided, well, okay, well we'll set it up so we'll do felons too. So we got cross-appointed to be both circuit court and district court judge. And DOC didn't, the Department of Corrections didn't want us to do it, but we said, oh well, we're going to do it. And so it was sort of like, maybe we just had sort of an arrogance that came of stupidity that we just sort of just said, well, we're just going to do it, and so we did it. But but we were sort of covered again, just as Judge Schnee had Gregor there in Kalamazoo. I had Jeff Sauter as the prosecutor in Eaton County, and also my sheriff was Rick Jones, who eventually became chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he came on board. But it's also the kind of thing they would come in and see it and they would buy in. So same kind of thing. My right flank was covered by my prosecutor and my sheriff. So I may have been crazy, but it wasn't stupid. I knew my right flank was covered, so I figured I was okay. So.
Question I did not ask Judge Schmay, but let me ask you. You've done sobriety court, treatment courts for years. Worthwhile?
I retired 2 years ago after spending 20 years on the bench. I'm sure I wouldn't have made it 20 years if it hadn't been for the treatment courts. The story of Bob is kind of funny, but I'm kind of a type A personality. I've had a fair amount of success in my life. I believe in winning. I definitely felt I was failing when these people kept coming back, and it wasn't something I could accept. So if I'd been locked into just sitting there watching the revolving door, I think after a few years I'd have gone on to something else. So I think that's what kept me there. I learned so much from it. I mean, people tend to think about, if you're the treatment court judge, look at all the great things that you're doing, that you're making people's lives better and all that sort of stuff, but it's making your life better. I mean, it changes you, that you're able to involved in this process that is possibly actually doing some good things. I mean, I think maybe there's a little less rust on your soul that you are doing these things, and good things are happening. And there are things that happen that you never anticipate when you go into it. Like, I live in Grand Ledge. It's a small town. I mean, I like today. Yesterday I was out putting up the Christmas decorations, and a guy drives up in his pickup truck, and he says, Judge Hoffman, I'm doing so good. Thank you. You need any help on your Christmas decorations? No. And it's sort of like, it's like this goes. You go to the grocery store, you're standing in line, and somebody goes, Bob's doing good. Well, I can't remember who Bob is, but you're going, good. I mean, there's a constant reaffirmation of you. It's again, and Bill talks about it in terms, it's a community sort of thing. You feel like you have, there's been positive things that have happened in your life, and so was it worthwhile? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's worthwhile. I think it's made me a better person, a happier person, and I don't think I would have survived on the bench without it.
Judge May, well, you come back and ask that same question, and then we're going to do the joint thing here with Harvey.
Okay. I want to know if it's going to turn him into a Democrat. That's right. That's what I'm looking for.
You and Mackenzie. All right, so do we want to?
Well, first off, we'll have him sit here, and then we'll. I'm going to do that one question with you, sir.
What was that question? I don't remember.
Was it worthwhile?
Was it worthwhile? Oh, yes.
And then we will. So Judge May, was being a treatment court judge, being involved with MATCP, but treatment court judge especially, was that something worthwhile for you?
Looking back on the whole adventure, I guess I'd call it, I really think it was, for me, the most important thing I did as a judge. There's no question about it. It's important to call balls and strikes, and it's important to administer the judicial system, and wherever your bailiwick happens to be, and it's important to do it efficiently and fairly and all of that. But ultimately, I just really believe that we're dealing with human beings, and as long as we're dealing with human beings, we have to do the best for them that we possibly can. If it can be done